and welcome to this installment of the eScribe Atlas webinar series. We've got a really great agenda today, starting out with an introduction to our guest, Chris Astrella. We'll then explore what digital innovation for city clerks looks like, specifically, followed by some actionable steps you can begin right away for your community. Just as a housekeeping note, we will be accepting questions in the chat at any time throughout the show, so drop them in there and we will answer them at the end. So without further ado, let's get started. So today we've got with us Chris Astrella, MPA, who was a clerk treasurer for more than 16 years in Wisconsin and most recently for the town of Oakland in Jefferson County. He has served on the board of directors for the Wisconsin Municipal Clerks Association, even serving as its 37th president, and was officially claimed a clerk at heart at the 2021 annual conference. He currently consults with software firms and communities seeking to make their public services more efficient, accountable, and cost-effective, as well as increasing positive civic engagement. So welcome, Chris. That's quite a resume.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of work, but I'm very proud of it. So thank you for the great introduction as well.
Oh, absolutely. We're glad to have you. So now we'll dive in with the big question. What does digital innovation for city clerks look like, and why should we be focusing on it?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a really it's kind of a newer topic as well. It's really there was some of this was taking place prior to the pandemic, but really COVID kind of accelerated all this at a breakneck speed. And so obviously we've got some points on here. I'm going to talk about them, give some examples, but really what it comes down to, at least in my opinion, the number one reason to innovate is because citizens expect it. We have seen really since COVID, but during COVID, since COVID, we've seen so much adaptability from businesses, from the private sector, because when COVID hit, they had to survive. Like, it really came down to, is our business going to stay in business? Are we going to be viable as a money-making entity in the future? And so they did whatever they needed to do. We saw this with restaurants really, pushing takeout options, and with places like Target and Walmart incorporating drive up, where you park your car, you pop your trunk, and somebody will come out and place your groceries, your order in there. This is what these larger businesses had to do to survive. And so fortunately, unfortunately, depending on your perspective, in local government, we, at least in Wisconsin, I can speak to Wisconsin very clearly since I worked there for so long, but in Wisconsin, we always had that guarantee of revenue from property taxes. And so we didn't have to worry about, well, are we going to be a municipality next year, because we're always going to have property taxes. So we didn't have to innovate nearly as much as our private sector competition kind of had to. But the problem that local government is facing now is that because the private sector advanced so much and has done so many things to make essentially getting our money easier, citizens expect that now. They expect things like text messages for updates, and they expect online forms and online permits and online payments and things like that. And I'll give an example. I'm coming to you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. So good morning from sunny and hot Las Vegas. My wife and I got really tired of winter, and we moved, and it was the best move ever. But if something is a hassle, and this goes kind of to the second point here, if something is a hassle or really hard to complete, they're just not going to do it. I'll pick the dog license that we have. I actually live in Henderson, but in Henderson here, we have paper dog licenses. We're a city of over 300,000 people, and we don't have the option to submit our dog licenses online. And this is just, when I wrapped my head around that, I couldn't even believe it. It's really, especially for a city of our size, but even for a city of smaller size, 20,000, 10,000. These are what residents and visitors expect now from local government, and even county and state government is kind of the digitization of local government and being able to accomplish things outside of normal business hours, empowering residents and visitors to do stuff on their own, so it doesn't have to be done when the office is open. So what this means though is with innovation, and again, kind of, it's a great transition from myself to myself. This means more accessibility for everybody. So another example that I give is whenever I give a talk like this is if you think of people who work at bars and restaurants and really typically bars, but sometimes restaurants that are open late. But people who work at bars serving alcohol, they don't typically work first shift. They typically work second or third shift. And local government offices are typically open first shift. So how can we have those folks who require licenses to serve alcohol? How can we make their lives easier by getting their liquor license applications figured out, their operator's licenses submitted on time and everything? They can't come in when they work third shift during the first shift because they're sleeping. My wife was a nurse, a floor nurse at a hospital for a number of years, and she started off as third shift and eventually worked her way to first shift. So what's really great about digital government, digital innovation is it allows you to drive more engagement, to engage with those folks who otherwise just wouldn't engage at all. But also it opens up the possibilities for them to actually conduct work that you would normally have to do while your office is open. They can do it outside of business hours and it's already completed for you in the morning. It's fantastic. And with that, you're going to see an increase in compliance. You're going to see an increase in revenue. I'm not going to read these verbatim, but it really is true. When people have the ability, the availability to complete work themselves. I mean, there's just been a shift, say in the past 10, 15 years to put more things online and allow people to empower themselves and do the work themselves. It takes more off of local government officials and staff's plates and allows you to work and focus on more of the kind of higher knowledge, really deep tasks that you have that you can focus on. It can really loosen up your plate and your staff's plates to do a lot more. And so with the increase in compliance, you're of course going to see a little bump in revenue. And I don't know of a municipality out there that doesn't want more money. Like, I just don't know. Like, everybody wants more money. Budgets are always tight. They're always the worst budgets we've ever done. I went through 16 budgets. I know exactly what that feels like. So it really is important to keep these things not even just top of mind, but like front of mind and middle mind and back of mind, because the residents, it really comes down to how are you responding to your residents? How are you responding to your constituents? How are you making their lives easier? And that's super important, at least for me. And I really feel like it is for everybody else too.
Oh, absolutely. I know there have been many times when, I needed to have something done, but, because there wasn't a digital option for it, it tends to kind of fall on the back burner and maybe sometimes even fall off of the stove completely.
Exactly.
So yeah, it is really a benefit to both citizens and clerks.
Exactly.
Sure. Can you talk some more about some specific examples of digital innovation for city clerks? I know we have a few listed here, but maybe if you could offer some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I've seen really take off in terms of online payments is QR codes. And I mean, QR codes in general, I've seen them take off everywhere. Like, especially here in Las Vegas, I happen to see QR codes all over the place. I see them on TV. I see them for parking. I see them for all types of things. But QR codes, they're not only, I mean, how many of us have seen them at restaurants for menus now? Like, that's a huge thing from the pandemic. Like, literally just popped into my head. But think of the money. And again, this is an adjustment that private businesses had to make, but think of the money that businesses are saving by doing a QR code for a menu. They don't have to print a menu. They don't have to buy hand sanitizer. They don't have to buy sanitizer to wipe them off. They can buy less washcloths. When you break it down like that, a QR code for a menu, it's going to save them a lot of money. It's also going to save them a lot of time too. They don't have to hand out menus. Do they have enough? Is there enough in the back? Blah, 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 blah. I could go on for days about that. But QR codes, it's turned more into a source for information, from a source of information to now a source to make payments. I've seen things like online boat launches. So if you have a boat launch instead of filling out a little envelope and tearing off the top and putting it on your windshield and then putting it in a Dropbox, you just scan the QR code, put your credit card in, and you're good to go. As a former boater, I used to own a boat in Wisconsin. We sold it before we moved to Nevada. Not a lot of water out here, but as a former boat owner, I can really respect wanting to get out on the water as fast as possible because that's what you want to do. It's the same kind of thing with online licensing. Just before this started, Brennan just happened to volunteer that he does not own a printer, and so that is something that, keeping that in your mind, it really comes down to an equity issue as well. This is one of the things that I studied in my master's program, is that, you think about equity and how you can reach the people where they are. People under a certain age, and I'm not going to pick on Brennan because I don't know how old he is, but I know he's a little younger than me. But people under a certain age, they just don't own printers anymore. Like, they do everything right here on their phone. And so it really comes down to, if you have a form that needs to be filled out and they don't have a printer, how are they going to get that form to you? Do they have access to transportation to go to a library? Do they have a family member who might own a printer? These are things that you have to think about when you're thinking about digital innovation, why it's important, why, examples are good. So some really great examples of online license. Think of any license you've ever issued, and it's a perfect example for an online license: a dog license, a building permit, a special events permit, an operator's license to serve alcohol, liquor licenses, any license that you issue, a short-term rental for like Airbnb. They are all great examples and very easy examples of how moving things online will just make the whole process better. Another thing, and I recently discovered this in the past couple of months, but improved municipal websites is a very big deal as well. What I like to say is the rule of 3 clicks. And folks may have heard of the rule of 3 emails. If you can't accomplish something in 3 emails, get up, go over and talk to the person, or give them a call on the phone. The rule of 3 clicks is the same concept. If somebody can't find something on your website in 3 clicks, what are they going to do? They're going to call you. And it really comes down to, do you have time for that phone call? Is it something really easy? Is it something really simple? Is it a detailed question? Anything like that. But if you think about that, if you look at your website through a resident or a visitor's eyes, if they can't figure something out, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to give up and they're going to call you. And literally last week, I did that. Like, I was on a website, I was trying to figure something out, and I gave up because I couldn't figure it out. And so doing what I do with municipal websites, I would consider myself a bit of an expert. Yes, I'm more of a clerk expert, but I really subscribe to that rule of 3 clicks. So if you can't find something easily, if it's not accessible, if it's not intuitive, it's time to really look at your website and see if there's another way, a better way to do that. Some new tools and channels for faster and more thorough communication. If you have an online notification service, like say there's a pothole in the road, snap a picture of it, fire it in. Do you have an app for that? Is there a service out there that exists for that? I'm pretty sure there is. So you've got to find them. And really, public meeting management software is also one of the things that the pandemic kind of taught us, is that when we couldn't have everybody in person, and I went through this, so I know, but when we couldn't have everybody in person, how can we still have people attend our meetings without attending our meetings? And so one of the examples that I like to bring up is, and I don't mean to talk about religion, but our church went virtual. My wife and my church went virtual. And so instead of going to church on Sundays, this is during the pandemic, we would have it on in the kitchen, making breakfast and doing everything and doing what we needed to do, but we were still there at church. And eventually, government meetings became the same thing. Zoom was a deal. Everybody was like this on Zoom. Some people still have Zooms, some people don't. But it's really about, how can you get more people involved, more people engaged in your municipality that might not otherwise do that. So I'm really excited about all this stuff. Like, you can just tell, I'm just like, whoa, this is great. But I love all this stuff. It doesn't mean that you have to do it all at once. Picking a piece or a part here and there. I mean, I'd love it if you do it all at once, but a lot of change quickly can be a bit much. So picking a piece, picking something that might be the most effective for you guys, that's something that I would do. And I see in the chat that we have a question, Brennan.
We do have a question. I think we'll get to those at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it sounds like there is no shortage at all of options for digitalizing the role of city clerks. So, taking it from exploring all of these options, as a segue into what you were just saying, how might city clerks get started, today? I think it sounds like a really big, overwhelming kind of project to digitalize, the clerk's operations.
Yes.
What can they do to get started, right away?
Yeah, and I think really the key is to do something. And I say this in the class that I teach, in talks like this that I give, something, and I'm going to quote this is something that I said to Brennan when we were talking about this. Something is better than nothing. You've got to do something. It's really up to you as a clerk, if you're a treasurer, if you're an administrator, it's up at, as a member of the staff, it's really up to you to identify where maybe your biggest point is, where you could have your most impact. Or if you want to start with some lower hanging fruit and maybe not have the biggest impact, but take a baby step into it. Some folks would say, yeah, I would say like start with like a digital boat launch. If you have a boat launch, or start using a QR code for payments, things like that. Maybe pick a license or two that you issue that isn't the most frequent one that you issue, but start with that and work your way up. Or if you're like, I want to scrap all of this paper and start and go completely digital, then go for it. Like just jump right in. But really, like, do your research, find the companies that are out there, because there's so many out there. And I don't want to advocate for one over the other. eScribe is awesome. The companies that I consult for are great. But attend conferences because they're always there. Like they're always there. There's get the information. And I know it can be a little weird. Again, I was a clerk, so I know what it's like. Having that conversation with the vendor, it can be a little bit weird. They're trying to sell you stuff because they are. But the problem is that the things that they are trying to sell really will make your life easier, make your work life a lot easier. And that's something that as a clerk, as a former clerk, I can totally understand that. If any of these tools existed even 3 years ago, even 5 years ago, like just to implement them would have been flipping awesome. So do the research, explore the solutions, have those conversations. They may not be comfortable ones. There may be talking about price and a little bit about how your office flow works and things like that. But those conversations will lead you to figure out what's the best fit for your community. The one thing I will say about every clerk, no matter where they are, clerks are the ones that know their communities the best. And so you have to figure out what is best for you. I knew what was best for me in Oakland and every other community that I worked in prior to them. Nobody else did. Even my elected officials, they thought they knew, they had no idea. But the clerks know. And so know your community. If you run maybe parallel processes, and I think we might talk about this a little bit later, maybe parallel processes like some paper, some digital, that's fine. But do the research and do something. Being a clerk has really been in the news a lot in the past like 3 to 5 years. I want to thank former President Donald Trump for that, because all of the election stuff that has come up, whether you have one piece in elections or a very small piece or a very large piece, he brought a lot of questions, and maybe some folks would say maybe not great questions, but I would say any publicity is good publicity. Our jobs as clerks, as treasurers, as administrators, municipal staff kind of had been taken for granted for a long time. And so the conversation about what we do, how we do it, how we accomplish our work is great, because now people know, and this hasn't been going on forever. Like I started as a clerk in 2005 and I had to explain to people what I did. And now I don't have to do that anymore. Like I can say I was a clerk for almost 17 years and they get exactly what I was doing. So this is an exciting time to be a clerk. It can be a challenging time, but it is definitely an exciting time. And I mentioned this a little bit. Digital tools really are changing the way that municipal government is administered, that the way that they work, the way that the work is actually accomplished. And so this is a great thing. This is something to be proud of. It's going to be a slow process. We all know that government tends to run a little bit slower. That's totally fine. As long as you get on board and start doing something, eventually you will see the payoff in the end. And really, simplification is the goal. I think even before I graduated with my bachelor's degree in political science, I have my master's in public administration. Even before I went to college, I've always kind of had the mindset of how can we make this process simpler, whatever this process is, doesn't matter. How can we make it simpler? How can we save money? How can we eliminate paper? How can we do things like that? And so looking at a specific process in great detail and just getting every piece of it, even if it's just writing it down, examine that process and figure out where you can save time, where you can save money, maybe where you can even make a little bit of money. But simplification is really the goal. I think time is the biggest factor here. You're gonna see an increase in revenue. We talked about that a little bit, a little bump. You're gonna see time saved. The biggest thing, time saved from your residents, time saved from your visitors, and that will free everybody up to do more. So I think really simplification and time is the biggest thing here.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, just the fact that it really is a one foot in front of the other kind of game. It doesn't all have to be a sweeping change that takes place overnight.
Exactly.
Just start with something and build from there.
It
So
can be, again, it can be if you want it to, but I really feel like, a little, and maybe this the local government employee in me, I feel like slower and a little bit steadier might be the way to go. But there are folks out there that just like, we're starting over, we're going to blow everything up, and let's do it. That's great too. It's whatever works. Again, whatever works for your municipality, that's the key.
absolutely. So yeah, I think we've reached a good point where we can address some of the questions that have dropped in the chat here. So first off, we have how will digital governments help people who are not tech savvy, or say, for instance, senior citizens who struggle with technology?
I'm so glad that somebody asked that question, because that is real. Like, first of all, thank you for asking it. That is so real. I'm going to give a really quick background on the last community I worked for. So the town of Oakland, population 3,000 in South Central Wisconsin. I had a nice mix of tech savvy people and farmers. So I had to keep in mind in my community that I needed to be able to communicate to folks who might struggle with technology, who were older. We had folks who had second homes. We're about 2.5 hours from Chicago, so we had a lake and a section of lake homes. So those folks had access to get to money. So socioeconomic factors for sure. We also had farmers and other socioeconomic factors to play with. There were some lower income folks. So this is something, even though, it was a kind of your typical small town Wisconsin without a downtown, there were all kinds of factors that had to come into play. And so this is where we talk about parallel processes a little bit. What I would suggest, and for those folks who are not tech savvy or who struggle with technology, is to run a parallel process. You have that paper process, and I'm gonna pick on something that's familiar to me. You have a liquor license application, an operator's license application that somebody will fill out completely on paper. That's great. Keep it for, pick a time frame, 6 months, for a year, whatever. What you're going to have to do at some point is say to those folks who are not tech savvy, who are not up on technology, you're going to have to get on board. And that can be a struggle. But what the issue is with that is they're going to hold everybody else back. And if you want to be kind of a leader in digital government, if you want to make your work life better, you're going to have to do one over the other. Again, very short story. I used to be a city clerk in a small town in Wisconsin, about 3,000. I wanted to move completely to paper packets. I had 4 of my 7 council members who were 100% on board with it. We had city-owned iPads, blah, 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 blah. Everything worked for them. I had 3 of my city council members who did not want to do it, did not embrace technology. Unfortunately, I had to be the bad guy, and I had to say, I'm not doing both, because it's too much of a pain in the butt to do an electronic one and a paper one at the same time. So what's it going to be? And I essentially I left it up to them. The majority ruled. We went completely electronic, and those folks who didn't want paper had to get on board or get off the city council. They got on board. It's not one of those things where you should or you could or should do it forever. You really should kind of set a time limit and be like, okay, we're going to train you on this. We're gonna it's gonna kind of hurt for a little while. I think of like recycling, and when everybody had the bins and then they went to the carts that are on wheels now that are all over the country. It's going to be a change, and there's going to be some growing pains from it, but it's something that you're going to have to keep in mind, and kind of you're going to have to pick one over the other and not do both. But I think there is a time, and again, you being the clerks, you know your community is the best. That time is going to be the limit. We'll run it for 6 months. We'll run it for a year, and then after that, we're going to cut off the paper and not do it anymore. But you guys have to set those rules, but also make sure you follow them. Don't make any exceptions for anybody, because we all know residents will talk to each other, and if you treat one way and you treat somebody else differently, eventually it's going to get back and well, you did this for them, did this for my neighbor, why can't you do it for me? So that's a great question though, and that really can be a struggle. I gotta believe. I remember my last town board, I had folks that were pushing north of 65 and 70. So I completely understand that. It's going to be tough, but it's one of those things you just really got to stick to your guns on it.
That's great advice. Let's go to a next question. How do you get around legality of signatures or notary for certain forms?
Yeah, that's a good one. Notary, I don't know that there is a way to get around it. I like to consider myself a pretty smart guy about a couple of things. That would be a really great question for your municipal attorney, Sarah. But I don't know that there is a way around notary. Digital signatures, though, they're used everywhere. So I don't know that legality in terms of a digital signature is an issue. Couple of examples that I have: when I bought my house in Wisconsin in 2006, everything was hard copy. Everything had to be a wet signature. I had to give everything to the person, our mortgage officer, in person in a folder. When we bought our house here in Nevada 2 years ago, everything was DocuSign. Everything was DocuSign. My mortgage officer was actually located in Los Angeles. I never met him, which is still a little weird to me. But I never met him. Everything was uploaded to a secure cloud, things like that. So in terms of signatures, I think you're fine in terms of forms and stuff like that, licenses, permits, those things that you might issue. Notary is one that I would check with your attorney about that. Check with your state. Check the laws that are around that. I was a notary in Wisconsin, and I think there isn't a way around notary in Wisconsin. But check with where you are and see, because that's going to be one that you might have to finagle a little way, or maybe not even finagle at all, and you'll have to have an actual notary stamp on it. It's a really great question.
Cool. Okay, I think, let me make sure that we don't have anything else. I think that wraps up the Q&A section. I don't see any additional questions. Let me make one last look.
Yeah, don't be shy. I love to answer questions if I can.
It seems like we've got quite a few of them answered, and in the course of answering other questions. So
awesome.
That again is a good thing. But yeah, I don't see any other questions. So do you have any closing remarks or closing thoughts on all of this to tie a bow on it?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like digital government, digital innovation. And again, I kind of let off with this, but it's really a new topic. I've been speaking at some conferences across the country specifically about this, and the feedback that I've been getting from attendees is that nobody has talked about this like ever. And so they're really great about really soaking up, kind of what I'm sharing. And a lot of it is what I've talked about here. So the message is still the same, but the message really comes down to kind of what I've talked about in the beginning. Private industry has, and again, they had the finances to do it, but private industry has kind of leapfrogged local government, state government, county government, because they had to survive. And now, because that expectation is there for citizens, for residents, for visitors, they expect it as well. And one thing that I forgot to mention, technology is also typically a lot cheaper than a person. A person, and again, pick a position, but a person can cost somewhere between $50,000 and $80,000 with benefits, with fringe benefits and the salary and all that stuff. Technology can cost maybe like 10 or 15% of that. And so if you're looking for ways to stretch the dollars that you already don't have because the budgets are tight, but to avoid hiring people, and I'm not about not hiring people. If you need the people, hire them. But as a way to kind of augment the staff and make sure that your lives are as simple as possible, technology really can do a lot more. It can work outside of normal business hours and have things ready for you when you get in the morning. It's something that you need to look at, and it really will be a cost savings. But I think my last kind of nugget of knowledge that I would be willing to share, and I could share a lot more things, but I won't. But
We do have a couple more questions.
well, good. Oh, good.
Yeah, they keep coming in.
Good. But my last kind of nugget that I'll share is when you institute digital government in some form, the onus is on you guys to market it like it's the coolest thing ever, because it really is. Like, it's really awesome, like how technology has evolved even in the past 5 years from what it was. But it's really exciting. I mean, yes, I'm excited about it, of course. But if you want your residents and you want your visitors to use it, you have to be excited about it as well. And you have to convey that excitement along to them, because how are you going to convince them to use it if you're like, oh, we got this new thing here, use it, it's great, blah, blah, blah. Like, jazz it up a little bit and show that you're excited about it, and convey that message to everybody. Send out press releases, get an article in the paper about it, the online paper, on your Facebook page, on your website, put it out there that you're using it and let everybody know that it's awesome. So I'm going to stop talking just because I see we have some more questions coming in. So that's great.
Yeah, we do. So are there any risks involved, like breach of data or something, when we think about the digital world? And if yes, how do you mitigate those risks?
Yeah, I mean, there's always going to be a risk. I mean, if you're doing online payments, you have to make sure that you have a really good payment processor, and there's so many of them out there. It's almost like there's too many to choose from. So it's like, how do you choose who's the best? Again, it kind of comes back to doing your research. Talk with other municipalities around you of similar size, maybe in other states, that are doing these things already, and see who they use and ask them the questions. How are things going? Are there things that you like? Are there things that you don't? As a clerk in Wisconsin, we used to have, they still do. I used to have access to an email network of all 1,500 members of the Wisconsin Municipal Clerks Association. And it was a really great way to send a question out and get 100 different answers back in 15 minutes. If your state has something like that, send a feeler out. Do you use this company? Do you know of a company that uses this? What are your stances with that? How do you like it? In terms of mitigating those risks, it really comes down to it, and I'm going to focus on payment processing for a minute. But on payment processing, if you're not the ones processing the payments, you're not the ones that are going to be mitigating those risks. The processor will be. So you have to ask the questions. What type of security do you have in place? Do you have a backup to that? What have you had a data breach? What does it look like? Blah 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 blah. But the same is also true for the companies that don't do payment processing, that do all the other digital stuff. So just ask, like, what type of security do you have in place? Any reputable company, eScribe included, but any reputable company should be able to answer that, within a minute or two, or at least give you a quick overview of what they've got, what the backup systems are, what their response would be in case something happens. If it takes a little bit of time to get that information out of a company, maybe you want to look somewhere else, but I'm not going to be the one to suggest that, but maybe you do. So it's something that's super important. It's really, that's a great question, Norman. I'm seeing that. It's a great question, but it's kind of on the onus. It's almost like when I moved here and I had to find new medical care. I had to find a doctor that I really felt comfortable with. Got to find somebody that makes you feel comfortable, that really is willing to work with you on stuff and be transparent, because in local government, we're transparent about everything. And if a company is not transparent with you, that can be a tough sell. So that's That's what I would say about those. And
Okay.
a very good question too. Very good question.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question here is, as you've been implementing digital solutions, what processes have you put in place to document new policies and procedures, as well as abide by retention schedules?
Yes, clearly that is a question from a clerk. I love that. That is a great question. Oh my goodness. Ruth, outstanding question. One of the things that I do in my class that I teach is I talk about actually looking at the process and timing it. So look at your paper process, presuming you haven't switched to anything yet. Look at your paper process. Look at how long it takes. Like actually get a stopwatch. Like I have a stopwatch on my iPhone, so grab your phone, or if you have an old stopwatch, that's cool, and actually time it how long it takes for a member of your staff or you to complete this application or to complete this license or whatever it is. Does it have to go across multiple departments, like my operator's licenses had to in Wisconsin? I had to send it to my police chief for a background check. Factor that in. What digital government will do is it should cut that time in half. It really should. It should really simplify, the streamlining of going back and forth, not having to walk a folder of things over to the police chief to get background checks done. Retention schedules are a big thing as well. And I'm glad that that's what led me to believe that you're a clerk, because only clerks know about retention schedules. Look at your ordinances, look at your, in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Historical Society had a huge retention schedule on non-election related documents. And then the Wisconsin Elections Commission had things on election related documents. So it's really doing whatever you can to follow those procedures. Companies should be able to follow your schedule. Now, they probably won't know what those schedules are, your records retention schedules are. So just tell them, I need to hold on to this record for X amount of years, for 7 years. In election world, in Wisconsin, we had to hold everything for 24 months, or 22 months after the election date. And so just let them know, I need this for this amount of time. Can you do that? Most of them are probably going to say yes. So that's, again, it's going to be more of a communication than it is, from the company's perspective. They don't all know because they're working for 50 states essentially, and everybody's retention schedule is different. So just be upfront and be transparent and be like, hey, I need to hold on to my dog licenses for 5 years. Can we do that? And it really should be a simple yes or a no. But that's a really great question. Thank you for asking that. And presuming you're a clerk, thank you for the work that you do as well.
Yes, absolutely. Last question I see in here. Do you recommend a gradual transition or a cold turkey switch?
This is the best question of all, and I'm not going to answer it because I don't know. Sarah, you know your municipality best. I've seen both. Yeah, yes, but it's true. I've seen both. I've seen folks say, you know what, we are done. We're cutting it off. We're not going to do any more paper. I've seen parallel processes, paper and electronic, because of older folks who aren't comfortable with technology, that sort of thing. There isn't a right or a wrong answer. One thing I will say, which might factor into it a little bit, is that if you have, and I've come across this with some municipalities that I've met with, if you have an old legacy system, and I'm not naming names, not because I don't know them, but if you have something that just doesn't work, that isn't functional, that maybe has had a lot of money dumped into and people don't like, get rid of it. Just get rid of it. Don't waste any more time on it. Don't waste any more money on it, because it's just lost. Like, there's nothing that you can do to resuscitate this old system that's not going to work in 2023. So, you might have somebody who's like, well, we had this custom built for us and blah, 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 and this, get rid of it. It doesn't matter. It's 10 years old. It's not going to work anymore. So I think something like that, I would say go cold turkey. But if you're starting and you don't have a legacy system, your community best, and you would have to figure out what would work best. If you've got a lot of people who are coming in asking for online payments, asking for online forms and permits and digital things like that, maybe it's the right move to just go cold turkey. If you don't have a lot of that, I would go parallel processes, and again, how I said before, use it for up to the paper for up to 6 months, or up to a year, and then cut it off and go that way. But it's not, there isn't a right or a wrong answer. You've just got to know your community and what'll work best.
Okay, and then it looks like we did get one more in here from Sarah. Wondering if you or anyone on this webinar uses softwares that you love for permitting, accounting, and finance, tax, billing, receipts, and assessments. If there are any recommendations you might want to give, if not, maybe point in the right direction of where to start looking.
So this is great. I love that people are sharing this. I'm going to ask Brennan, can I share who I work for or not? It's okay to say no.
I believe so, yes. I mean,
Okay.
that's, yeah.
I've consulted for a number of municipalities. I actually work for two companies called HeyGov and TownWeb. I've heard Civic Plus is really good. I've never worked with Civic Plus, but I've heard they're really good. But it kind of goes back to what I said in the beginning. There's so many out there. And Sarah, I'm glad that you asked the question. I'm not going to say that, HeyGov or TownWeb would be best for you. I'm not going to say that Civic Plus would be best for you, or GovOffice or MuniCode or even eScribe. eScribe might not be best for you. It's best for a lot of people, but you guys have to figure out what the best fit for you is. It's kind of like, I mean, I didn't wear a wedding dress, but my wife did. It's kind of the wedding dress analogy. It's like, the fit when you put that dress on and you get married and blah, 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 blah. For me, it's the house. This house was the best fit for us here in Vegas, and that's what we go with. So there's a lot of them out there, and please feel free to share more in the chat if you have more that you suggest, but really do the research and figure out who's the best fit for you, and then go with them.
Okay. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the questions. I don't see any more coming in. So with that, I think we're ready to close. Chris, it was great talking to you as always. And if anyone listening in has any questions or would like to reach out to Chris or eScribe, please feel free. So with that, I will bid you adieu.
Thank you, everybody. Have an awesome day, and thanks for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.